Thank you so much. Thank you, Sahak, for inviting me. Thank you, everyone. 300 years ago, in the same year when the first disciples of Mkhit received the island of San Lazzaro from the Republic of Venice, the young congregation had to endure a difficult test, which risked to compromise its very existence. This is a complicated story to tell, since it blends together two different kinds of issues. On the one hand, the rivalry and jealousy stirred among Catholic missionaries by the success obtained by the first Mkhitarists in their apostolic effort, which resulted in quarrels, disputes, and finally serious allegations of illicit behavior. On the other, a much more important and general issue concerning what at the time was called Communicatio in Sacris, literally interaction in the sacred things or worship in common. I cannot switch the... It's a very PDF. I can do it. Thank you. Sorry. Okay. With this expression, with Communicatio in Sacris, the Roman Church labeled any kind of participation of a Catholic to the liturgical celebrations and sacraments of a non-Catholic worship. Some concrete examples of this practice were the mutual assistance to the Eucharistic liturgy, the sharing of the same church or sacred space, and the recourse to ministers of a different confession for the administration of sacraments such as baptism or confession. This applied in the same way also to the participation to funerary rites, while marriage would also be included in this category if it was celebrated by a non-Catholic minister. In the above listed forms, Communicatio in Sacris was a phenomenon frequently occurring in the areas characterized by religious pluralism, and it was practiced, for instance, in the European territories shared by Catholics and Protestants. Nevertheless, it reached particularly lasting and remarkable proportions in the Near East, as a consequence of the increasing number of local Christians converted to Catholicism. In their case, the Communicatio was inevitable not only because of pre-existing family ties too traumatic to interrupt, but also and mostly because of the juridical framework of the Ottoman Empire. According to it, certain sacraments and rites of passage, such as baptisms, marriages, and funerals, had civil effects, and their implementation was delegated to the only officially recognized religious authorities, that is, the Orthodox hierarchies, depending on the Armenian and on the Greek patriarchs of Constantinople. Until 1830, no Eastern Catholic community could officially have its own churches or a recognized Catholic hierarchy. The converts who refused to receive the sacraments from the priests of their original community could be considered rebels also from a political point of view, since they challenged the authority of the patriarch appointed by the Sultan. In this case, they were exposed to violent retaliation. During the 16th and 17th centuries, the situation was not perceived as an actual problem because the early Catholic missionaries accepted a good deal of confessional ambiguity from their converts, allowing them to keep their profession of faith secret and letting them attend their national churches. Among the Armenians of Constantinople, for example, Catholic converts could publicly attend the Armenian apostolic churches to be baptized and married, and then go, more or less secretly, to the European missionaries to be confessed or to take the communion from their hands. For a long time, Rome did not clarify this issue with a general instruction, in the effort to defend both the reasons of orthodoxy and those of apostolate. Nevertheless, during the first decades of the 18th century, a more determined and rigorous approach emerged among Vatican theologians. Things had changed from the early times, when a tolerant attitude could be justified as an instrument to ease the conversions of several souls, with a sort of Trojan horse strategy. The moment had come to preserve the already existing Catholic communities, especially the Armenian ones, which counted thousands of people, by defending them from the risk of doctrinal indifferentism. For this reason, a series of particular decrees banning Communicatio in Sacris were finally issued. This, however, provoked a deep fracture among the missionaries themselves, between those who deemed it necessary to interrupt all contacts with the Apostolic Orthodox hierarchy, like the Jesuits and the Armenian pupils of Propaganda Fide, and those who were more tolerant and tried to find some compromise, like the Capuchins and especially the disciples of Abbot Mkhit. This division, in fact, was worsened by the mistrust shown by the religious training in Rome toward the newly founded monastic congregation, which was deemed too much independent, in a way too much Armenian to be really Catholic. The Armenian pupils of Propaganda Fide had more or less consciously introjected a theological and ecclesial system based on the Western scholastic tradition, on the Latin liturgy, and on the Counter-Reformation model. Mkhit, on the other hand, wanted to train his disciples through the rediscovery of the specificity of the Armenian tradition, being convinced of its substantial orthodoxy. His goal was the full communion between the Roman and the Armenian Church, without splitting or tearing its ecclesial body. For this reason, for example, in 1714, he opposed the plan to obtain separate churches for the Armenian Catholics from the Ottoman government. As he imagined, this plan eventually failed, and the abbot earned the hostility of the promoters of the plan, particularly of the patriarchal vicar of Constantinople, Raimondo Galani. In light of this background, we are not surprised to find out that 2 years later, at the end of 1716, two missionaries working under Galani wrote to Rome in order to denounce what they called the misdeeds of Mkhit disciples, and particularly of Father Kevork Khachaturian. Among the several accusations of greed, ignorance, and disobedience to the Latin vicar, there was also the charge that Kevork had allowed Armenian Catholics to engage in Communicatio in Sacris without any struggle. The congregation of Propaganda Fide immediately ordered Mkhit to call Father Kevork back and to suspend the envoy of other missionaries to the east. The abbot obeyed, but at the same time began to prepare his defense by collecting a series of attestations of esteem and letters of recommendation in his support. In order to counterattack, in fact, Mkhit decided to personally plead the cause of his disciples in Rome, where he arrived in the first days of June 1718, together with Kevork and another companion. We are informed of that because the three men had to appear before the tribunal of the Holy Office in order to publicly profess the Catholic faith. This was not a special treatment due to the impending affair, but a precautionary rule that regarded all Eastern Christians passing through Rome, even those who were already known as Catholics. In this sense, the registers that collect these professions of faith are an extraordinary source, on the basis of which I am currently building a prosopographical database for more than 3,000 individuals between 1650 and 1800. While in the city, Mkhit took note of the allegations and prepared a defensive memorial in Armenian, printed then in Italian translation and submitted to the Congregation of Propaganda. In that occasion, particularly useful was the support shown to him by Cacciatore Zomezzighi, former missionary to Constantinople, then based in Venice, and by Gasparo Bartolomeo Berard, parish priest of the Armenian community of Livorno. In their letters, they argued that the charges pressed against the Mkhitarists were due to a misunderstanding. Some Latin missionaries, and some Armenian Catholics too, had come to believe that the sacraments imparted by the apostolic clergy were void of value. This statement had caused the reaction of the disciples of Mkhit, who had rightly objected that the Armenian priests were real priests, and the bread consecrated by them was a truly Eucharistic one, even if its reception was illicit for a Catholic. Such defense of the validity of the Armenian clergy and sacraments had, however, convinced many people that the Mkhitarists would grant indiscriminate permission to attend the apostolic churches. The examination of the case lasted for a few months, until September 1718, when the abbot and his disciples were acquitted of all charges. However, it was decided for the future that any Mkhitarist monk had to be subjected to a preliminary examination in Venice before being sent into mission. When Mkhit was sojourning in Rome, Cardinal Sebastiano Tanara asked for his help to address in a more general way the issue of Communicatio in Sacris, a problem that had been clogging the chancellery of the Holy Office for many years. On the 6th of October, the abbot submitted to the Roman Inquisition 3 doubts, which could be summed up in a single question. Is it licit for Armenian Catholics to attend the churches of the schismatics in order to perform baptisms, weddings, and funerals there, since it is not possible to do otherwise without a serious risk and a danger of life? Together with such a question, Mkhit took care to send along a memorial in which he tried to solicit a positive response. The main arguments concern primarily the very condition of the Armenian Church in the Near East, which, he claimed, could not be defined as heretical or schismatic in a formal, proper sense, but only in a material one. In other words, because of the ignorance of the clergy and of the historical events, some incorrect beliefs had been gradually introduced, but this had not affected, in Mkhit's view, the substantial Catholicity of the faith professed by the Armenians. Secondly, the Catholic missionaries had begun to prohibit Communicatio Sacris only after some recent decisions of the Holy Office. The main one being a decree of November the 28th, 1709, which forbade Catholic converts from Isfahan and Ujulfa to attend Armenian churches and to receive the sacraments there. But, Mkhit objected, this decree had been issued only in view of the peculiar features of that place. In Persia, Armenian Catholics had the opportunity to attend the churches of the European missionaries, and above all, the ones under the protection of the powerful Armenian family. This condition did not regard the Armenians living in the Ottoman Empire, where the religious policy was different and more hostile toward Catholic converts. Mkhit presented the Communicatio Sacris not only as inevitable, but even as useful to the propagation of Catholicism. According to the abbot, in fact, the new converts were not exposed to any danger of perversion through the contact with the schismatic priests, who in any case were interested, according to him, only in receiving the alms of the faithful. On the contrary, his own experience taught that the apostolic Armenians had come to assimilate many aspects of Catholic piety, such as the recitation of the Hail Mary, the Eucharistic adoration, or the frequent confession and communion. Thus, from 1694 to 1710, thousands of conversions had occurred among the Armenians before the decree of the Holy Office in 1709 blocked this growth and put everything in jeopardy. How could, Mkhit asked, new Catholics preserve their faith if they were prevented from going to the only churches available? In conclusion, after a long series of practical and pastoral reasons, Mkhit resorted to the canonical doctrine in order to reaffirm that the prohibition to interact with heretics and schismatics was not absolute and could be dispensed. Despite all these arguments, the opinion drafted by the consultor, a sort of judge, of the Holy Office, Giuseppe Maria Baldrati, was absolutely negative. According to him, the practice of Communicatio Sacris was made illicit by its consequences, that is, the scandal in the eyes of good Catholics and the danger of perverting their orthodoxy, not to mention the fact that the very entrance into the Armenian churches and the participation to their liturgy ended up taking the value of a confession of heretical faith. The vote of Baldrati was endorsed by the cardinal inquisitors, but unexpectedly not by the Pope. Clement XI, in fact, did not give a sharp negative answer to the above-mentioned question, but rather proposed an interim solution that avoided taking a clear-cut position. In this way, the Pope essentially left the decision in the hands of the missionaries, to whom the faithful were supposed to turn for the illumination of their conscience. Such a move, far from resolving the problem, made the diversity of views inside the Catholic world manifest. In fact, as soon as the news of the resolution reached the East, the enemies of the Mkhitarist order and the most uncompromising missionaries made their voices heard. The Patriarchal Vicar of Constantinople, Galani, in a letter dated June 13, 1720, reported to Rome that the abbot had lied in describing the conditions of life of the Armenian Catholics in the Ottoman Empire. According to Galani, those who refused to perform baptisms, weddings, and funerals in the schismatic church were subject just to monetary fines, without any danger of death. According to Galani, Mkhit was also guilty of having written some letters in which he explained the decree of 1719 as a permission to attend the apostolic churches. The abbot obviously reacted, rejecting all the allegations and stating his absolute sincerity and fidelity to the Holy See. Nonetheless, he took the occasion to stress, once again, his arguments for the necessity of some form of practical tolerance. In particular, he claimed that his critics ignored the reality of facts. During the past few decades, many Armenians had been converted to Catholicism, but where had they been married and buried if not in the Armenian Apostolic churches. Even the Armenian missionaries of propaganda, who were so critical of the Communicatio, had been baptized in the Apostolic churches by the hands of schismatic priests. Indeed, it was impossible to go against the Ottoman political order, and I quote, "Inside the Turkish Empire, no one can baptize, join in marriage, or marry without the consent of the schismatic patriarch of the Armenians, who is entitled to that by royal decree. And from this prerogative he draws most of his revenue to repay the Ottoman government. Therefore, as long as Catholics are under the jurisdiction of the schismatic patriarch, by receiving the sacraments outside his churches, they fall into the crime of lèse majesty, not only because they reveal themselves to be Franks, as Latins are called, but also because they directly contradict the royal decree that puts them under the jurisdiction of the patriarch." In November 1719, the cardinals of the Holy Office decided it was necessary to collect more detailed information on this issue, including not only the opinion of the Latin missionaries, but also that of the Eastern Catholic clergy. It was necessary to carry out such a survey as widely as possible, because by changing location, the terms of the dispute could also change, and what in a country could be an occasion of scandal or perversion, in another country could be considered acceptable. The text of the circular basically resumed the three doubts posed by Mkhit. The answers of the missionaries, coming from Constantinople, Aleppo, Isfahan, Cairo, and other places, were collected in a thick dossier of more than 250 leaves conserved in the archives of the Holy Office, and therefore inaccessible to scholars until recent times. There's no time here to examine in detail the different kinds of opinions mentioned in the letters, which I discuss at length in my forthcoming book. In short, the majority of respondents believed that the interaction with the schismatics did represent a serious danger to the Catholic faith, but nonetheless, the replies in favor of some form of tolerance were more or less the same number, in fact slightly more, than those pushing for a sharp prohibition. Anyway, pressed by the request to solve the situation once and for all, in 1729, the Holy Office finally approved a general instruction prohibiting Communicatio Sacris in the broadest way possible. However, this clear stance was not sufficient to eradicate the phenomenon, which remained widespread in the East for decades. Armenian Catholics were now caught between the Roman prohibition and the Ottoman obligations, finding it impossible to respect both. Throughout the 18th century, continuous requests to soften the norm were sent to Rome from the Near East. Periodically, there were scandals about the permissiveness shown by some missionaries toward their faith. The suspicions of the Inquisition concentrated particularly on the Mkhitite congregation and on its vocation to overcome confessional barriers. Mkhit had chosen to highlight the commonalities beyond the misunderstandings. While fully respecting the papal authority and the rules of the Roman Church, he believed that the union should pass through the dialogue with the extant Armenian hierarchy and not through its replacement with another uniate one, as it happened instead in 1742. Despite all the caution and compromises of the abbot, such an approach obviously exposed his disciples to accusations of excessive familiarity with the schismatics. In 1761, for example, the missionary Pasquale Longhi accused the successor of Mkhit, Stepanos Mekonian, to respect the Roman decrees only in public, secretly allowing his monks to transgress them. On the 30th of July 1770, propaganda decided that every Mkhitarist about to leave for the Levant was obliged to take an oath, promising not to engage in Communicatio Sacris. In the following years, the debate was rekindled by a series of pamphlets published by the Venetian banker of Armenian origin, Giovanni de Serposo, a friend and a supporter of the order. These works were a belated attempt to demonstrate the lawfulness of certain forms of communication and the substantial Catholicism of the Armenian tradition. But they had no concrete effect, if not to arouse again the critical attention of the Holy Office. By the beginning of the 19th century, the construction of clear-cut confessional identities and the Roman choice for uniatism were a reality. Paradoxically, the solution to the problem did not come from a softening of the confessional borders, but rather from their strengthening. Following a long diplomatic and political crisis, in the 1830s, the Ottoman government approved a series of radical reforms, which included the recognition of a sacred millet for Catholics. In 1831, the Armenian Catholic primate was granted civil authority over his own faith. Only then, Eastern Catholics were really emancipated from the control of the Orthodox hierarchy, and the conditions that had hitherto made the Communicatio Sacris, what we may call a necessary transgression, no longer subsisted. Thank you.